Welcome to Noble Warrior. My name is CK Lin. Noble Warrior is where I interview multi-dimensional entrepreneurs about their journey. We'll deconstruct their mindset, mental models, and actionable tactics so you can take them and build your life and business with more impact and fulfillment. If you have any friends who could use better mindset, go ahead and share this with them on social media so they too can benefit from your discovery. My next guest is Mitzi Perdue. She's the daughter of the person who founded the world famous Sheraton Hotel Chain. She's also the widow of Frank Perdue of Perdue Chickens. She's the founder of Win This Fight, Stop Human Trafficking Now. Our conversation was cut short due to a technical glitch. If you want to follow up with her, go ahead and text Mitzi at 51555 with the word WTF. We talked about why she's still working hard and dedicating her life at 80 years old. We talked about how she used wrongness to attract attention for the right cause. She talked about a counterintuitive but a brilliant way to combat human trafficking rings and why storytelling is her weapon of choice for the impact she wants to make in the world. She talked about the number one skill of success the founder of the Sheraton Hotel passed down to his daughter, who's Mitzi. And she also talked about the specific tactics the founder of the Sheraton Hotel did to boost employee morale during the Great Depression. Lastly, we talked about how to cultivate grace and presence as a mindset. Please enjoy my conversation with Mitzi Perdue, the founder of Win This Fight, Stop Human Trafficking Now. Please welcome Mitzi Perdue.
Hi, what a joy to be here. And hi, everybody.
So thank you so much for being here. So excited to have you. When I first encountered you, right away, I felt, wow, this woman is a woman of wisdom and joy and grace and dignity. So thank you for being here.
My Lord, you just mentioned all the things I'd like to be or aspire to be. So thank you.
You're so welcome. So let's jump right into it because I know that you have limited time. So you were very blessed to be born into a legacy family. You had a career of 22 years. You have authored 8 books. You're about to turn 80. Why do you continue to, do this type of work? And you could easily be vacationing somewhere else, doing nothing, and relax for the rest of your life. Why do you continue to, get up in the morning and do what we're doing right now?
Okay, in truth, I asked myself that question too, because life would be just so much easier if I sat back and watched and binged on Netflix or whatever. But I'll tell you what keeps me going. The passion that I have for how I want to spend the rest of my years, and I hope there are quite a few, is combating human trafficking. And when I think that if I have one chance of helping one person, that I should get out of bed and keep doing what I'm doing. But the project that I'm working on, it has the capacity, potentially collaborating with a great many others, of saving millions of lives. And I make a guess about our audience that a lot of people who are in the audience may not be totally familiar with what human trafficking is. I mean, some will, but can I take a moment to explain why it gets me out of bed in the morning?
Please do.
Okay, I got into this about, roughly 2 years ago. I heard a lecture, and before that time, the words human trafficking would just sort of glide by. They're just words. But then I saw in this lecture photographs of little girls who, there might have been a dozen of them, and they were probably 10 to 12 years old, and the photographs were catching them just before they were rescued. Well, I got to see the look on their faces, and their faces were sort of frozen in fear, terror, despair. And they're young girls, like 10 to 12 years old. Well, the story has a happy ending because they were rescued. But those little girls, for months or years before, they had been raped like 10, 20 times a night. And yeah, the amount of suffering that must involve is just unthinkable. And there's a quote that I memorized from Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa said that it's immoral to be discouraged by the size of a problem. The good that you can do, you must do. And I kind of figured that I could do something, even if it's small, but that if I can do it, I should do it.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. What a contrast, right? The how your background is a very, how do I say, very a very privileged background, and now you saw something of a tremendous human suffering and want to devote your life to it. So I do have a question before we dive into it deeper into this issue of human trafficking. There are a million other causes, though. There may, maybe hunger issues or homelessness. How did this particular issue really, like landed for you in the heart?
All right, I have a purpose in life, and that's
Mm-hmm.
to increase happiness and decrease misery. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm unaware of any greater misery than somebody, well, slavery to begin with. The United Nations says there's more than 40 million people who are enslaved today. And
Wow.
by the way, if you're in slavery, you never have a happy day. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think it's about 8 million who are sex trafficked. And
Mm-hmm.
and by the way, it happens to men as well as women. But can you simply imagine? I mean, it's almost too dark a place to go to. And I'll tell you in great transparency that uh, I almost limit myself to the amount that I let myself think of how deep the suffering is, because I think I just go crazy.
Yeah.
But so I try to think of what I can do about it, as opposed to how huge the problem is.
Yeah. It's a path, the path of a healer. The path of it's you're carrying out others people's burden from my point of view, and for someone like you who's full of light and joy, it's that's why I was curious to know, why is it that you wanted to basically go through the opposite, I don't know, but this continuum to basically to go to the darkest place of essentially human suffering, you
Well,
know?
it's so far beyond anything that I had ever heard of. I mean, like, oh, let's move on to happier things as soon as I finish this part. But I'm aware of like snuff movies where people will pay a great deal amount of money to see a 2-year-old raped to death or
Mhm.
put in a cage and set in fire. I mean, the amount of evil and suffering, it's I don't think that at least somebody who has any caring, it's awful hard to turn your back on that. Except you can turn your back on it if you think there's nothing I can do. But
Mhm.
I've got ways which I'm going to recommend to our friends, things that they can do that won't cost them a penny, but that will make a difference.
Mm. Well, that's intriguing. Why don't
Meant
you
to
share?
be, meant to
Yeah,
be.
yeah. Let's. Yeah. Why don't we go there, and then I have some follow-up questions for you as well.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I do a lot of speaking on this subject. Um, I mean, I bet in the last 2 years I've given 100 talks on it. And this is partly about fundraising, but it's also about awareness raising. And my particular approach is, I don't know anything about rescuing a child or freeing somebody from slavery. I certainly don't know how to treat them. So I thought, what can I bring? What can I bring in this struggle? And I thought, well, I've got a lifetime in communications.
Mhm.
I've had almost 40 years uh, in radio, television, and newspapers. So I know a lot of people in media.
Mhm.
And from my point of view, what I can offer is I can offer awareness and I can offer fundraising.
Mhm.
And that means that any anti-trafficking organization that exists, I'm here to help you raise money. I'm here to help you raise awareness. So I don't compete with anybody else. I help meet some of their needs. And even if it's in a small way, if a person can help an anti-trafficking organization, now first through volunteering, which would be wonderful, and I recommend it to everybody, but it also counts if you can raise funds for them. And that means, the more funds they have, the less time they have to spend raising funds themselves, and the more time they can spend delivering services. And then finally, I've done articles probably by now on 100 different anti-trafficking organizations,
Mhm.
and every one of them would like to have more awareness of the problem. Well, somebody who is a professional writer and has spent, there was a period that where I was the most widely syndicated writer on the environment in the country. So I do have background in writing, so I can help spread the word. But
Yeah.
what I can do most of all, where I would most like to involve our listeners or our viewers, our audience, is I would love for them to offer. I don't particularly want their money, although I'd sure as heck not turn it down. But I would love them to volunteer. And right now they're close to 500 volunteers, and I make a pledge to anybody who wants to do something about human trafficking that I will never ask you for more time than you want to give or more money than you want to give. But should you choose to donate time, here's a promise to you. I will do everything that I know how to match your interests and your skills and abilities and passions to the job that you get. And
Mm,
you'll be given a whole menu of things that you could volunteer for.
mm,
And and I know from the people who are working on it, they say it's some of the most satisfying work they ever do, because the very darkness of human trafficking means that if you can make any difference, you're making a huge difference.
yeah.
So I'm breaking it down for people. I'm giving people ways of helping to attack this problem. And my first recommendation is find an existing anti-trafficking organization to work for. But if you don't have one, join me and I'll give you jobs that will be very meaningful and exciting. And some of the people who work with the organization is called Win This Fight. Some
Mhm.
of the people who join together collaborating in this say that it's some of the most satisfying work they've ever done.
For those of you interested to follow with Mitzi, I'm gonna promote your newsletter again. Text 51555 with WTF. Okay.
I bet you've got a slight curiosity why sweet little old lady Mitzi would be using WTF
Go
in my
for it.
text. Okay, I would love to. I'm eager to share this story because when I started getting involved in wanting to help combat human trafficking, I had a name for the organization. It was called the Anti-Trafficking Auction.com. A couple of weeks into it, I got a phone call from a guy who's a neuroscientist. Not only is he a neuroscientist, he's a neuromarketer. He's studied, everything you can think of about why you make decisions and what your instincts, and just, he's got a whole host of knowledge about how people make decisions. And this gentleman, I've since become really good friends with him. He started out by telling me, Mitzi, your name, the Anti-Trafficking Auction, sucks. Well, I loved that because he explained why. He
Mm,
said, first of all, it's not memorable.
mm,
And I kind of have to agree with him. It's not memorable. He says there's no call to action. And
mm,
he said, a really good thing if you're trying to get attention is to have some wrongness in it.
mm,
Something that sort of grates, or if it, I don't really want to grate on anybody, but it, there's an incongruity between Lady Like Mitzi using the acronym WTF for Win
mm,
This Fight.
mm,
And he said, that's perfect because
mm,
there's enough of a contrast between how you act and how you are. And,
mm.
WTF, can we count and everybody know what WTF stands for when you're not thinking win this fight?
I mean, that's the obvious, right? What the fuck? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for saying it. I mean, I'd say it too, but
Yeah.
my image. Anyway, he said that it was just straight out from heaven to have the name Win This Fight because it's a call to action.
Mm,
And, who can forget WTF?
mm, mm. Yeah, it's true. I mean, my natural reaction hearing the stats around human trafficking, the natural
It's
reaction is what the fuck, right?
WTF. I
Yeah,
mean,
it
really,
is what the
it's
fuck. Yeah.
what I'm still having trouble saying it, but I have no problem saying WTF. Oh, come on, we're good
I'll
friends.
say, yeah, I'll say it for you. It's all good.
I'm wondering whether I should work up my courage and actually see if I
No,
can do it.
no,
I don't know if I can
it's
do it.
okay.
What
Yeah.
the? I'm stuck. Can't do
What
it.
the F?
Not
Yeah.
for the cause. What the fuck?
Yeah,
No,
there
I
you go.
said it on air. Ah!
Yeah. So you've been studying this, 100 different approaches to solve human trafficking. I'm curious to know, have you come across anyone that you're like, really, really promising,
Yes.
so go ahead, share with us.
Okay, this, to me, the most exciting one, and I actually had something to do with, I mean, if it gets put into practice, I had something to do with if it works. And I'll share with everybody what it is. It isn't really public yet, but here goes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in favor and I endorse any anti-trafficking activity. Whether it's rescue or prevention or rehabilitation, they're all needed, and I think they'll be needed for years and years and years. But what if we could prevent it? And I had the huge honor and privilege late last year, of addressing the International Fraud Group. And I have to tell a little side story and then just take it on faith that I will wrap it up and bring it back to human trafficking.
Go for it.
Thank you. Somewhere around 20 or 30 years ago, one of the larger software companies, and I'm not supposed to say their name, so I won't, but just think large software company, they're having a terrible problem with counterfeiters because they might, put millions of dollars into software and then sell it for a couple of $100. But a counterfeiter, for the price of a disc, which might be 5 cents, could sell, it costs them 5 cents and they're making a couple of $100 on it by just perfectly counterfeiting the software. Well, the company, of course, wanted to shut down the counterfeiters, but they kept finding that every time they would put somebody in jail, somebody else would quick pop up and do the same thing because it was so profitable. And so they really weren't making a dent in their counterfeiting or pirating problem until there's a group. It's called the International Fraud Group. The International Fraud Group went to the software company and said, there's a better way. We need to get at the incentives that make people want to do pirating. Let's take the incentives away. And by the way, I'll jump ahead and tell you that the same principle I'm about to describe now can apply to human traffickers. But the International Fraud Group went to the large software company and said, we have a lot of expertise and ability to look at the dark web, to use artificial intelligence, to use covert activities in one way or another. We can track the bank accounts of the pirates, of the software counterfeiters, and hire us to do this and let's see what happens. Well, here's what happened. They would get the software guys, the pirates, who were making millions of dollars, but they'd locate their bank accounts. And frequently it took a lot to get to their bank accounts because it would be one shell company. And I'm making this up, but maybe the Cayman Islands or Liechtenstein or who knows what. But they had the ability to track the money until they could get to the bank where it was being hidden. And they'd go to the bank and they'd show them just, with enormous clarity, total proof, this money that you're handling is hot. Freeze the guy's account. And the threat underneath it was, if you don't freeze it, you're going to get terrible publicity and maybe fines for money laundering. So the banks were always eager to cooperate, because what bank wants to be accused publicly of money laundering? So the International Fraud Group would freeze the account, seize the money, give it back to the person it really belonged to, which was the large software company. And in a fairly short time, the motivation for the pirates was to make money. And suddenly, they're making money, but it's going right back to the software company. They can't use it. And they destroyed the incentive behind pirating. And they effectively ended pirating. Woohoo! Well, what if that same principle were applied to human trafficking, except it's a much bigger problem? Software piracy is in the millions. Human trafficking is in the billions. I've heard estimates that there are $150 billion made each year out of human trafficking. But that means that there are a lot of bank accounts that can be frozen. And So I had the privilege of giving this keynote to the International Fraud Group, and I asked, might this be of interest to them? And how about, yeah, it was. Okay, that's part one. Part two,
Mhm.
I don't want to name the anti-trafficking organization yet because we're still
Mhm.
kind of figuring out how much we can work together. But
Sure.
one of the very largest anti-trafficking organizations in the United States, anyway, has a lot of the kind of database where it would make it really fast to find the traffickers. And the International Fraud Group has the dark web, the covert
But
operations, just a whole lot of skill in finding bank accounts. And then there's one of the largest banks, maybe in the world. And again, I don't want to mention the name yet because we're still in the discussion stage, but they're enthusiastic about it. So what if the International Fraud Group represents 47 different countries? The huge American anti-trafficking organization has possibly the largest database in the world.
mm,
So what if you could put that together, and then with a bank that's excited about this, I mean, maybe we could really make a difference in
mm.
taking away some of the incentives for trafficking.
I like that a lot. Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, when it comes down to it, I mean, I hate to say this, it is a business for the human traffickers, right? For them, maybe their commodities are human beings, but it is for them, it's about revenue and profit generating. So if you go after directly what they're interested in, it's going to hurt the most per se. Versus, you do the rehabilitation or the rescue missions and so forth. To me, you go higher stream to actually address the source of the core of the problem rather than the symptoms per
Yeah,
se.
I think most people would agree that what motivates the traffickers, I mean, they're probably psychopaths and they're just bad, nasty people. But I think what they're in it for is money. And what if we could block their accounts?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I just said a what if, but there are a lot of people who are agreeing on this. And I just want to say ahead of time that it won't be smooth sailing to get from here to there, but there's some
Mhm.
really, really smart people working on how to do it. So I think I'm hopeful that it won't solve the problem, but it could make a huge dent.
I agree 100%. So if you don't mind, kind of explain the economics of it a little bit. I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm curious to know how to actually make this sustainable per se, right? So is the International Fraud Group a coalition, a nonprofit, or a corporation, and just a group of volunteers? Like
Okay,
how
it's
would your
absolutely
economics
not
work?
volunteers. This is a professional organization of people
Okay.
who have some extraordinary specialized skills.
Okay.
And I'm going to throw out a figure which won't be completely accurate, but I'm sure it's directionally accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I believe I know some of the members of this who are making $250,000 a year,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't do it for free because
Mm-hmm.
they've got kids to put through college and mortgages to pay. So
Mm-hmm.
they can't do it for free, much as they'd like to. So they do need. Well, I'll tell you what my dream is. They do need a backer, and I think for $10 million we could make an unbelievably huge impact on human trafficking. And
Mm-hmm.
for what would keep it be sustainable is when you freeze those bank accounts, what if it were just stipulated ahead of time, 5% goes to the umbrella organization that pays the the experts in this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think the business model is sound. And my prayer is that somebody listening to us today, maybe they're head of a large foundation, or maybe they're a corporation that could really, really use some good PR.
Mm-hmm.
Nike, are you listening to me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What big corporation or foundation wouldn't like to be the one that made the biggest dent in human trafficking for
Yeah,
$10 million? Okay,
exactly.
that's the hope, and I don't know what will happen, but if you don't try, you don't have a chance. You miss
Exactly.
100% of the shots you don't take.
I really love it. Thank you so much for sharing that idea. And I think that's a very scalable idea as well. So, um,
And by the way, I
mhm,
mentioned that I'm looking for volunteers. You wouldn't
mhm,
believe the range of skills that we can make use of in this. There's writing press releases, or I don't know, managing websites, or public speaking, just volunteering on a local level. The project is so big; it's $150 billion a year object that we're after.
Hmm.
I pretty much think that almost any skill a person has, we will eagerly make use of.
So change of topic a bit, if you don't mind. You've been an author, you've been a journalist, you're a thought leader a rising thought leader in the human trafficking world. And you've been on a podcast guest for 90 something times last year. So what's your thought about the role of authors or storytellers in our social media world today as a way to solve problems, right?
Well, I'm as big a believer in that as a person can be, because first of all, the essence of storytelling is what we've been doing around the campfires for probably 100,000 years. It is, our minds are wired to make use of stories. So stories are incredibly persuasive. And I bet you that I could have given you a list of facts about human trafficking,
Hmm.
and they don't move you. But you hear stories, and they do move you. So, and by the way, I don't think I'd get invited on any podcasts if I didn't have stories to tell.
Mm. Well, I
So,
mean,
so I'm as big a believer in stories as a tool for persuasion. I mean, there are others. I mean, maybe I could say, here's $100,000. Please, do what I want you to do. But that doesn't take you very far.
mm,
But a
mm,
story can. A story, when we make decisions, I've actually studied this in speech classes, and I've even given speech classes. But what moves people to act is their emotions, not their brains. I mean, maybe 1% of the people act because of just being rational. But I think I I do believe that people who study this say that for most people, it's going after your heart that moves people to actually act rather than just think about it. So
mhm.
as I'm repeating myself, but I'm as big a fan of storytelling as you can find.
So I'm curious because I'm a engineer by trade. So I'm
Yay! I
learning.
love engineers. Oh, they
Yeah,
make the world go round.
right. So I'm learning the craft of telling stories and asking interesting questions, making engaging content, and so forth. But you hang out with the likes of Mark Victor Hansen and professional storytellers, the creator of Chicken Soup with Soul. So I'm curious to know, from your perspective, sort of what is how do you go about making storytelling more effective in the social media world? Do you guys
Okay,
ever talk about that sort of at the dinner table? Like, how do you actually be more impactful using all these mechanisms, technology, social media, and so forth, allows you to make the kind of impact that you want to make? I'm curious.
okay, if somebody really wants to develop that, I have recommendation. It's it's a big, large scale investment in time and money, but the National Speakers Association, I think it has somewhere around 5,000 members, give or take. They put a huge amount of effort into teaching people how to tell stories, how to be engaging, and here's some of the things that I picked up from my membership. I've been a member for 5 years, but one of them is the deeper it comes from you, the deeper it reaches your audience.
Mm,
So tell something that moves you, because if you're just like reading off a laundry list of facts, somebody else's your audience is probably thinking of their shopping list or something rather than really listening to you. Another thing that's really good and impactful: be in the moment, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I have a way of getting at what it means to be in the moment. You've listened to improv, people who are just humorous, like on demand.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
One of the things that makes that so impactful is because you see the person's mind at work. You're living through it. It's like walking on a higher wire without a net. It's just so much more impactful than somebody who's reading a speech. So to
mm-hmm,
the extent that you can be spontaneous and you know be like an improv person, the better off you are.
mm,
Other things that are just super, and again, I'm sharing things that I've learned as a member of the National Speakers Association. Telling a story over and over again improves it. And so one of the things that we're recommended to as members of the NSA, National Speakers Association, is you should probably have told a story at least 40 times before you're on a stage getting paid for it. And you start out with, you're having coffee with your best friend and you say, hey, I had a funny thing happen. And then you tell the story and you see how much they like it. Well, after you've told it with a few friends, maybe you try your material out on Rotary or the Elks or a service club. And anyway, tell it 40 times before it's the big important audience that you really care about. Because the more you tell it, there's a funny thing that happens. The more you tell it, the more you can live it, the more you can forget the words. You just come out with it because it's on the tip of your tongue. So practice, practice, practice is one of the big secrets of storytelling. And then, and then let me give you the best.
Yes.
You ready for the best?
Let's go for it. All
right. The essence of every story is you've got to have conflict. You've got to have a resolution. So here's a way that they express it. Whatever story you're trying to tell, check with yourself just in your own mind. Is this carrying out the following diagram? And it's this. Your hero is walking along, ordinary day. You get him run up a tree. Maybe dogs are chasing or something. So he's up a tree. And then you throw stones at him. You make it worse and worse. What's going to happen to him? And then you get him down from the tree and he goes on his way. But he's different in some way. And that's the essence of every story. There's the hero, and it could be a woman, but for the sake of making it simple, let's say it's a guy, and walking along, gets scared up a tree. People are throwing stones at him. That's the conflict. And then the resolution is he comes down from the tree and continues his life, but in some way, wiser, smarter, better, in some way changed. Is that not a cool explanation of what a story is?
Absolutely. I love it. It essentially really summarized the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Right? In 3 bullet points. So I'm actually curious, you're about to turn 80. By the way, you don't look 80 at all. For sure.
Hey. I can tell you why.
Yeah, go for it, please.
Eat chicken.
Okay.
My family's in the chicken business.
Yeah. So I'm curious, reflecting upon your own life, your own life, your late husband's life, your father's life, right? What would you characterize as their ability or even your ability to be resilient, when it comes to facing adversity? Because a lot of people listening right now are probably facing some adversity, whether it's due to COVID or their psychological of staying at home or friction with the spouse or, or business issues. So it's trying time for a lot of people. So how would you, reflecting on the hero's journey of yourself, your late husband, and your father, can you tell us a story about facing adversity?
Yeah, I'd love to start off with my father. And by the way, I wrote a book with Mark Victor Hansen about this. It's called How to Be Up and Down Times.
That's right.
But to quickly tell the story of my father, he was the co-founder of the Sheraton Hotels, along with my uncle. And at the time of his death, the family owned 400 hotels. And we did sell them, so I'm no longer connected with Sheraton. But I did get to watch up close and personal what father was like and how he did it. And here's his story. And it is sort of the hero's story. The adversity for him was when he was 26 years old, he just couldn't figure out what he wanted to do in life. Actually, he couldn't figure out, he hadn't been a success at anything. He just moved from one thing to another and couldn't stick. And he finally, kind of out of desperation, because he's 26, he wanted to get married and start a family. And yet, if you can't hold a job, that's a problem. So he went to the Yellow Pages, or whatever the equivalent was, in 1923. Golly, that's almost 100 years ago, 97 years ago. Anyway, he went to the Yellow Pages and he found a career guidance counselor. The man's name was Johnson O'Connor. And he went to Johnson O'Connor saying, what do I need to do? I can't stick with anything. I'm not holding a job. I'd like to get married and have kids, but you can't do that if you can't hold a job. What's wrong? So Johnson O'Connor spent an entire day putting him through all sorts of tests. And at the end of that, Johnson O'Connor told my father, Ernest Henderson, "You have the worst human relations skills I've ever come across." Now, how's that for adversity? How's that for a kick in the teeth?
I can relate to that. I can totally relate to that.
Actually, I wonder how many, his background, by the way, was MIT in electrical engineering.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I
So,
totally relate. Yes.
so he had to be like the ultimate nerd, but with the worst human relation skills that Johnson O'Connor had ever come across. Well, I think, Johnson O'Connor, since he's there for career guidance counseling, told my father, you're clearly a smart fellow, no ability to get along with people. I think what you should do for the rest of your life is find a job in a laboratory where you never have to interact with anybody else and just do your science thing. And father could have done that. I'm glad he didn't, because I wouldn't have had a really cool, fun childhood. But here's what father did. And he told me about this. So, I know firsthand. Father told me that when he looked around the world, and he wanted to make something of himself. When he looked around the world, he kept coming up with the following conclusion. Whatever sort of train of thought he had, it always came back to, if you want to be a success, you have to get along with people. And if his people skills were so bad, well, he better do something about it. And as far as I can tell, the rest of his life was devoted to learning what makes people tick. And he started by studying psychology books, which he had never done before. He'd take salesmanship courses with the idea that you can't be a good salesman if you don't have a really good understanding of people. So public speaking, psychology, salesmanship, reading biographies, just studying. And he told me that, the book, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People? He not only took the Dale Carnegie course, he told me that he'd reread the book every 10 years because his goal was to overcome his deficit of having human relations skills that were the worst that Johnson O'Connor had ever seen. But where did that take him? Well, he was supposed to have a career as a scientist in a laboratory where he wouldn't interact with anybody. Instead, his greatest deficit, which is not being able to get along with people or understand them, by sheer study and effort, it became his greatest asset. And so he ended up in the hospitality industry, hiring people, working with people, being a great host. And I used to try to calculate that how many people, at least in the United States, interact with as many people as the head of a major hotel company did. I mean, maybe a national politician, but the number of people that father would speak with, or public speaking, or glad handing as a host, it was just endless. And he was spectacular at it, but he overcame a really severe deficit to become outstanding at it.
Thank you for sharing that story. So if I'm hearing you right, based on reflecting on your father's overcoming his adversity of not having people skills, is dedication, studying it, and keep iterating. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
Exactly and precisely. And may I give you an example of how this actually played out in real life and made money for him?
Go for it.
Okay, and it's something that anybody else can copy. I mean, or they can copy the principle anyway. And it's the following. I used to ask him as a little girl. It was just a really good way of getting parental attention. There were 5 of us, and this was my way of getting attention. I'd ask him why he did things. What made you a success, Daddy? And he'd give different answers because it wasn't just one answer. But one of them he told me was what he'd do when he'd take over a hotel. And he began in the Great Depression, where nobody was buying hotels and everybody was trying to unload them because you couldn't make money in the hotel business if nobody came to the hotels. It was sort of like, it has a lot in common with COVID-19. People just weren't coming to hotels. And back then it wasn't because of disease, it was because of the economy was in shambles. So how could he make a hotel a success when everybody else was failing? And here's a story that he told me. He said whenever he'd take over a hotel, and it would usually be one that was close to bankruptcy, the day he took possession, he'd invite all the employees into the hotel ballroom. And he knew ahead of time that every one of them was, just totally demoralized because they're thinking, I'm going to be fired and I'm not going to be able to find another job because there's 25% unemployment. And so he knew going in that the people that he's facing are just, as I said, as demoralized as possible. And he knew that. He understood that because, he had made it his business to try to figure out what people are thinking and feeling. And knowing that, the first words out of his mouth when he's addressing, 400, 800 people was, I want every one of you to keep your jobs. And instantly that means that they've gone from just utter misery to, oh, what a relief. I don't have to face my spouse or worry about putting food on the table. I'm keeping my job. But that's the beginning. Father would go on to say, I want you to keep your job because I know that you know your job better than anybody else in the whole world. And my job is to give you the resources and the encouragement to show the world just how good you are. And you're going to see that, in the next few months, we're going to be the most popular hotel in the whole city. And not only that, we're going to turn things around and we'll be an example for the rest of the city that, terrible and tough as times are during the Great Depression, terrible as things are, things can turn around and you'll see the hotel's going to be financially stable and will be an example to the rest of the city. Well, imagine, the people who are trooping in, at the beginning of this talk, they're miserable and they walk out knowing that the big boss believes in them. But that's only the small part of the story, because the bigger part of the story that he told me was the next day, those same employees would see, just dozens and dozens of like decorators or plumbers or electricians, doing whatever it takes to refurbish a hotel that's been on the verge of bankruptcy. But the good part of what they'd be seeing is those decorators, plumbers, electricians, whoever else, they didn't even go to the areas that the public would see. They'd go to the areas that only the employees would see, like the employee lockers, showers, dining rooms. And so I asked Father, why did you put so much money into areas that the public would never see? I mean, you wouldn't get your money back. This seems backwards to me. And he explained, he said that, well, he always felt that the success of the hotels were the people who worked there, and he wanted to signal to them how important they were to him. And he said, people have a compulsion to live up to or down to your expectations. And he wanted to show them by putting his first money into the locker rooms, showers, dining rooms, and so on, how important they were and how much he believed in them.
I appreciate that so much. Your father was a very astute student of human nature.
But I don't think, none of his competitors knew those approaches. I think he only knew them because he had to work to learn to understand other people. But he, at the end of his life, he said, whatever success I've had at every level, it's the employees who made Sheraton a success, not me.
I love that. And then one of the key lessons I actually learned from that story is you were quoting in another podcast is your father said a leader's job is to give people better visions of themselves.
Yeah, he used to say that with the attitude that he had, that, I believe in you. We're part of a team that's going to make this the best, the best hotel in the area. He said that it's much better for everybody if, say, the maid who's making a bed, or the bartender who's mixing drinks, or the porter who's carrying your bags, whatever, if they're working to make as a team to make the best hotel in the city, everybody's excited to come to work. Everybody wants to go beyond to go above and beyond and go the extra mile. And it's that energy that makes the hotels a success. And he did this 400 different times. I mean, it worked. That what I've just described, or actually, I'm quoting you, who was quoting me. A leader's job is to give people a better vision of themselves. It worked over and over and over and over and over again. It worked. Give people a better vision of themselves, and do that by showing how important they are, showing how you value them, giving them the resources to show the world just how good they are.
Yeah. So let's segue for a bit because I'm curious to know not just the part where your late husband, your father, and you being the shiny beacon of possibility for the people who are counting on them, you, but also the sort of the burden as well, right? Because he's responsible for employees of 400 hotels. I mean, God, one can imagine that, like, how much pressure that is. So could you share with us a little bit maybe of the time where you may have witnessed your late husband, your father may have like carried that burden, as well as what did they do to tactically have like a relief valve so then they can, go back to being that shiny beacon as well. Does that make sense? What
Oh,
I'm asking?
perfectly. Yeah, my late father had many hobbies, and he'd just throw himself into them. And I think that he did it, partly because he enjoyed them. But I also think that you can't you can't be at DEF CON, is it 1, the whole time? No. Uh, you can't be at a high adrenaline level the whole time, or you'll wear out. And so father was very good about how, I mean, he had hobbies like photography. He loved to learn about ancestry. He liked history. Frank Perdue was the same. And I used to think Frank Perdue, at the end of his days, had responsibility for 20,000 people. And I used to think, when you make a decision, or maybe you tick off the wrong politician or something, you have on your shoulders that, if you get it wrong, people will lose their jobs. They won't be able to pay for their kids' college, or their mortgages or whatever. I used to think that the pressure I knew he was under to get it right, that I couldn't personally, I mean, with my personality, I couldn't endure it for 5 minutes. And yet he had to, like, carry the responsibility for 20,000 people. And like my father, he had hobbies. Like, he loved to read about the founding fathers. I used
Mm,
to think towards the end of his days that there wasn't any major current book written on any of the founding fathers that Frank hadn't read. He was also interested in military history. One of his hobbies was uh, treasure hunting, and not in the sense that he himself would go out and dig up lost ships or something, but he would finance
mm,
treasure hunters, and that's paid off because the sunken treasure ship Atocha, uh,
mm,
when it was found in today's dollars, it was worth a couple of $1 billion. And
mm,
Frank was one of
mm,
the major backers of that, and that surely was exciting stuff. So, this is something that I advise absolutely everybody, whether you've got 20,000 employees or just yourself.
mm,
If times are tough, and COVID-19, how about they are tough just by definition? I mean, maybe somebody you love is ill. Maybe you're worrying about paying the rent. I don't know what your particular issue is, but to the extent that you possibly can, give yourself respite. It's medically necessary. And I don't know what your respite would be, but maybe it's, and I'll tell you what mine is. I love watching baby fawns on YouTube,
maybe
or
what? I'm sorry.
baby deer. Uh,
Oh, no kidding.
I mean, because they're just so cute, but I'm not going to recommend that to everybody. Everybody's got his or her own.
Mm,
I also like watching James Bond, or
no kidding. All
well,
right.
if you're watching a James Bond, even if you've seen it 4 times,
Mm.
you're if you're really into watching James Bond.
Who's your favorite Bond, by the way? Favorite Bond?
Oh, Sean Connery.
Sean Connery? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But remind me the name of the current one. I'm not thinking of it at the moment. I love him
Uh,
dearly. I
I
think
could
he's the
see.
second best.
Yeah, I could see his face. Daniel Craig.
Daniel Craig. Oh, I think he's terrific too. But
Yeah.
but anything that gives you an escape, so that while you're engaged in this escape activity, uh, you're not chewing yourself up with nervousness and anxiety, and where's the rent or whatever.
Mm, mm, mm,
It's I have a niece who runs a nursing home, And she says the people who are caregivers who don't fit into their day an hour or two of being removed from the stress of having somebody's life in their hands,
Mm-hmm.
they may die sooner than the person they're caring for.
That's right.
On the other hand, if they will deliberately and considering it medically necessary, give themselves an hour or two of maybe watching a movie, maybe having drinks with a friend, just something that gives you time to have your stress hormones go down, you'll
Yeah.
live longer, and you'll be able to cope with whatever it is that's eating you alive. You'll cope better if you give yourself a respite.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing on this podcast we talk a lot about is not just the solo activity, but also doing it with friends. Using technology like podcasting or Clubhouse as a way to, find like-minded people, so you can not just being in one's head all day. So for sure, thank you so much for sharing. I'm also watching the time. Do you mind if I ask you some rapid fire questions? Is that
Go
cool?
for it. By the
Okay.
way, can I ask our
Yeah.
audience something about?
Oh, that's right. Yes, you want to tell that story? Please do.
Okay. Uh, Gosh, I think I have to take my headphones off for this. We'll find out what happens because I'll put them right back on again. But I think you can hear me and I won't be able to hear you. Here
I can
goes.
hear you perfect. Yeah.
Okay. What you see here is a bandana. And it's taken from Rosie the Riveter, who was a character from, she was a real person back from World War II. And Rosie the Riveter did something extraordinary. And Rosie the Riveter really stands for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of women during World War II who left their homes to work in the factories. And by working in the factories, they freed the men to go off and defeat Nazism, which was at the time, just the worst thing that could happen to the world. They helped win World War II. Well, in kind of admiration of Rosie the Riveter, Win This Fight, one of the volunteers who works for Win This Fight, her name is Margot Dusterhouse, she thought, wouldn't it be cool if, sort of in remembrance and admiration of Rosie the Riveter, we created Rosie the Liberator?
Oh, I
And
like it.
Rosie the Liberator, what she does is, if you want to be part of this, and I'd really love you to, because you're going to meet a group of fabulous, fabulous people who are all on the same page. Rosie the Liberator, or if it's a guy, it's going to be Rusty the Liberator.
Okay.
Rosie the Liberator. Let's see if I can get the camera angle right for this. She makes a muscle
Mm.
and then takes a selfie of herself. And Rosie the Liberator posts it to her social media along with the hashtag Rosie the Liberator. And then come to winthisfight.org and get us a picture of what you posted to social media. And you'll get to see what hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people who are raising awareness about human trafficking, what they're doing. And you can get to vote on the funniest or the most appropriate, or we're even inviting graphic artists to like paint Rosie the Liberator or make a cartoon of her. But just in one way or another, come join this group that is raising awareness about human trafficking. And if you choose, make a $5 donation to the anti-trafficking organization of your choice. And it's going to make a difference. Rosie the Riveter left her home to fight Nazism. I'm asking you right now to join a fabulous group of people who are raising awareness about human trafficking, because human trafficking is never going to be really conquered until people rise up and say, no, this is awful, we're going to do something about it. So come join me. I'd love to have you.
I so appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. Join Mitzi with the fight. Text this number 51555 with WTF to join the newsletter. Join this this contest to join this movement for sure. Do you have a few minutes to do some rapid fire still?
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm actually very curious. This may or may not be a rapid fire. Jim Carrey has famously said, "Everyone wants millions of dollars in the bank, the fame, the power, and his wish is for people to receive it such that they know that that's not it." And you also have shared in your podcast somewhere that you share the 3 things that won't make you happy: money, power, and fame. Rather, it's truth, beauty, and goodness that's going to make you happy. Now, you're very, very fortunate to be born into a family of privilege, so you experience firsthand money, power, and fame. So I'm curious to know if you can, having been in that position, shares the wisdom and the depth of what Plato or Jim Carrey has shared a bit. I think that would be very, very useful.
All right. I did grow up with, how about as privileged as, I mean, to be filthy, stinking rich does mean that you're privileged. Yeah. However, I grew up with a whole, dozens and dozens of people who are in exactly my situation, who came from famous, wealthy families. And the number who did not end up happy is staggering. Money, power, and fame are no guarantee of happiness. In fact, I'm trying to think if I really mean this, and yeah, I do. I think they make you less happy.
Mm.
And the problem with money, power, and fame is you always want more,
Mm-hmm.
and it just distorts everything. Unless you have some really rock bottom values. And I think my father was just, and my mother were just, very, very strong on teaching us, like, to be honest, think of others, be generous, get your identity not from spending money, but by serving. And I would say Frank Perdue was exactly the same. In fact, one of Frank Perdue's sayings that I cherish is, if you want to be happy, think what you can do for somebody else. If you really want to be miserable, think what's owed to you.
Mm.
And so I think both families put an enormous effort into getting your meaning out of life by serving others. And my own motto is, success is measured not by what you can get, but by what you can give.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet you'd be surprised if you saw how middle class my life is, in spite of my resources. I live in a building where my neighbor, like, one of them runs a library, another, he works in a hospital, another is, and I'm not clear on what the term for it is, but like, she would like a career in the local police department, and you aren't an intern, maybe you're on probation. I'm not sure what the term is, but if all goes well, she will become a full-fledged police officer. But these are not high society people. They're just people who happen to live in the building that I'm in, and I love it. And I wouldn't, I think I could live anywhere I wanted. This is where I choose. Because I don't need a great big fancy McMansion to make me happy.
I mean, I can jam on you for hours just on this. Having had friends who have millions in the bank yet still miserable, and I witness it firsthand, I see the cost of not having a way to channel their resources to something that's meaningful for them. So for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, back to Frank saying, if you want to be happy, think what you can do for somebody else. If you want to be miserable, think what's owed to you. I'm so happy not being burdened with loads of possessions. I don't own a house. This is rental, and it's not huge, but that means that I can give a lot more resources to what I care about. When there was a period of 10 years where I would visit China every year. There was a family there that I became close to and really loved, and I'd get invited back year after year. Yay! But first class to China, at least when I was doing it, was $12,000. Economy class was $1,000. I never went first class. I never went business class. I always went economy, because that meant that there was $11,000 more that I could give to charity. And that gave me a lot more satisfaction than going first class would ever give me.
I appreciate that.
Well, and that's again on the theory that success is measured not by what you can get, but by what you can give.
Yeah. I mean, you're exuberant with joy and love for human beings, for contribution. I mean, it's very palpable, right? Just
I'm so pleased.
Yeah. What's grace for you? For someone who is full of grace, what's grace? How do you define grace?
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I have a list that's attached to the shelf behind my computer. And one of them is be graceful. And that doesn't mean just, let's see if I can get, that just doesn't mean graceful gestures. No, I think grace is, how about kindness, consideration, caring for others? To me, grace is, maybe it's a state of mind rather than how your body moves.